Somewhere deep in the mountains of Dagestan, isolated far from camera crews and UFC arena lights, sits a private estate owned by Islam Makhachev. It was supposed to be a place of peace, away from the spotlight. But when a private research team was granted rare access for a psychological documentary, something unexpected emerged. What they found inside wasn't luxury. It was discipline taken to an unnerving extreme. As you'll soon witness, this story isn't about wealth. It's about the price someone pays to become unstoppable. Subscribe before we step inside. When investigators stepped through the steel gate of Islam Makhachev's private mountain residence, they expected marble floors, championship belts displayed under spotlights, and the kind of extravagant grace most elite fighters eventually grow into. Instead, they were met by something far more unsettling: absolute stillness. There were no guards, no trainers, not even motion sensors. Just a long gravel path leading to a square, windowless structure made from untreated stone, cold and gray, blending into the rugged cliffs like it was designed to stay hidden from civilization itself. It didn't resemble a mansion, it resembled a bunker. Inside, the front entry held no furniture, only a heavy wooden bench, a bucket of ice water, and a folded training gi placed with surgical precision. The walls were unpainted concrete, showing faint hairline cracks where years of contact had slowly fractured the surface. There were no family photos, no career memorabilia, and not a single mirror. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cedar. What struck the team most was the temperature. It held at a consistent 53 degrees Fahrenheit, too cold to be comfortable, just warm enough to prevent shivering. Later, they discovered this was intentional. It was the temperature that promotes endurance focus and eliminates emotional distraction. There was no visible technology, no speakers, no televisions. Even the ceiling lights were industrial-grade LED panels, emitting a constant daylight hue that never shifted color or dimmed. In the far corner of the entryway, a digital timer was embedded into the wall, counting upward from a number so high it suggested it hadn't been reset in years. According to the system log later uncovered, it represented the total hours spent inside the estate without leaving. What disturbed them most wasn't what they saw, it was what they didn't. This was not a home built for rest. It was an environment engineered to eliminate comfort, emotion, and impulse. A place built not to celebrate success, but to manufacture something far more difficult to understand: total control. Beyond the entry corridor, a reinforced sliding door led investigators into what appeared to be a training hall, except nothing about it resembled a gym. The walls were padded with a dense material that did not match standard combat foam. When samples were later analyzed, they showed embedded fiber strands used in aircraft-grade impact testing, materials designed to withstand blunt trauma, far beyond what a human body should deliver. Embedded pressure sensors lined the floor in a perfect grid pattern, calibrated not just to detect movement, but to record force, reaction time, and strike precision with millisecond accuracy. There were no punching bags, no pads, not even mats. The only equipment was a solitary steel column positioned in the exact center of the room. Circular dents covered its surface at varying heights, some so deep they suggested impact equivalent to car collision force. A faint pattern in these dents showed that strikes had been delivered repeatedly at precise interval, as if someone was training impact rhythm rather than power. Each dent was labeled with handwritten numerical codes, likely speed, fatigue level, or internal rhythm cycles. Hidden microphones were discovered embedded in the ceiling. Not normal audio pickups, but biological resonance monitors, tools used in specialized military research to track vocal tremors that indicate emotional disruption. It meant that every sound, every breath, every suppressed moment of frustration was deliberately captured and analyzed. But the most disturbing discovery came from a small recessed shelf on the far wall. Set behind impact-resistant glass, investigators found 3 personal items: a photograph of Makhachev as a child, standing beside his father outside a small Dagestani gym; a handwritten note reading, "Strength is not domination. It is the removal of doubt." And below it, a small folded cloth bearing blood residue and sweat stains. DNA confirmed it wasn't his. The room didn't exist to make him stronger. It was built to push him beyond the limits of personal identity. The training chamber showed no signs of reward, celebration, or rest, only silent repetition, precise self-erasure. What the team didn't know yet was that this was just the beginning. Behind the next door, strength training was replaced by something far more chilling: psychological conditioning designed not for combat, but for emotional disconnection. The next section of the estate shifted from physical brutality to something far more unnerving. Instead of heavy doors and steel columns, the hallway narrowed into a seamless corridor lined with soundproofing foam, not to suppress noise from escaping outward, but to suppress noise from entering. Investigators noted that the silence wasn't natural, it was engineered. A decibel meter placed inside read near absolute zero. No hum of electricity, no vibration from external movement, just void. At the end of the hallway, they found a door unlike the others, not reinforced with steel, but lined with lead composite and labeled only with a 4-digit number, 0326. Later records would confirm this number aligned with psychological conditioning protocols used in early Soviet isolation studies. Behind it was a room that felt less like a gym and more like a sensory deprivation chamber. It measured exactly 3 by 3 meters, with matte black walls and a single light suspended from the ceiling. But the light wasn't static. It pulsed at irregular intervals, disrupting circadian rhythm patterns. Embedded into the wall was a biometric reader that mapped adrenaline responses through fingertip scans. The flooring was heated to a slight discomfort, forcing the subject to constantly shift stance to avoid tension buildup. There was no chair, no mat, and no place to rest. At first, investigators believed this room was built for meditative discipline, until they discovered the logbook. Stored electronically inside a concealed micropanel, it recorded time spent in the chamber, 1,143 cumulative hours. But deeper into the data, another log surfaced, marked Extended Cycle. It recorded sessions in which the subject remained in the chamber for up to 36 hours at a time, without sleep, food, or external stimuli. During these cycles, biometric scans tracked changes in emotional stability. Reading the logs sent a chill through the evaluation team. Every note ended with the same recorded response from Makhachev: "Emotion is a weakness. Pain is not resistance. Attachments are instability." But the most disturbing entry was written in a different language, a phrase repeatedly etched into the wall beneath the biometric reader, scratched into the surface with a fingernail: "Forgiveness abandons the warrior." It wasn't strength being trained here, it was the removal of empathy. And just ahead, they would discover why. In the next section of the estate, physical and psychological conditioning made way for something even darker: the isolation chamber where he rehearsed violence without opposition. When investigators advanced through a sealed composite door that required dual biometric confirmation, they entered a chamber that instantly felt wrong. Not because it was violent, but because it appeared perfectly calm. The room was a cube, 8 meters by 8, with walls coated in carbon fiber polymer, normally used for ballistic absorption. Overhead was a reinforced lighting system, set to the same luminescence used in high-stress interrogation environments to eliminate shadow perception and remove visual depth. Everything inside the room seemed designed to force the mind and body into execution mode, stripping away hesitation. There were no targets, no sparring gear, nothing living or mechanical to absorb contact. Instead, digital projection nodes were built into the walls around the room. When activated, they projected scenarios based on pre-programmed combat sequences, simulating attackers with 3D depth mapping using military-grade training software. These projections were not simple holograms. They reacted dynamically to body heat, micro-movements, and shift analysis, responding as if an opponent were truly present. Each simulated opponent was modeled after real fighters and designed to escalate aggression as fatigue increased. In the center of the chamber, the floor was worn into faint circular grooves, indicating repeated pacing, rotating, and striking movements, all without a visible target. Samples taken from the surface revealed traces of human blood embedded deep in the polymer. The concentration suggested not accidental injury, but controlled bleeding through deliberate impact. Makhachev's recorded sessions showed that during advanced cycles, he would practice finishing sequences without any resistance, executing precise movements on phantom opponents until exhaustion. Mounted above was a pulse monitoring scan array that tracked his emotional output through facial micro-expressions. Logs revealed a chilling metric. Under peak aggression simulation, his physiological response showed 0 stress markers, no signs of anger, no adrenaline spike, no hesitation. The most disturbing discovery was found in the digital playback archive. A sequence titled "If Necessary" showed Makhachev practicing a defensive scenario not against fighters, but against multiple unarmed intruders entering his home. The file ended in under 7 seconds. This chamber was not built to prepare for fights in the octagon. It was built to prepare for moments no athletic rulebook could cover. And beyond this training bunker, investigators would soon uncover evidence that his preparation wasn't only for combat, it was for something far more personal and far more unsettling. Just beyond the simulation chamber sat a narrow fortified hallway leading to a door unlike any other inside the mansion. It had no biometric reader, no keypad, only an old-fashioned mechanical lock requiring a physical key. That alone felt abnormal, considering the estate's advanced systems. The lock appeared scratched and worn, as if forced open multiple times. When it was bypassed, the door creaked inward, revealing a space that investigators could only describe as emotionally disturbing. Unlike the stark conditioning rooms, this chamber felt deliberately personal. Dust layered thick on shelves, dim light flickered from an aging bulb, and the walls were covered in pinned photographs, handwritten notes, and torn pages from notebooks. At first glance, it resembled the private reflection space of someone struggling to hold on to something human, but every detail inside told a far darker story. Pinned to one wall were photos from the early years of Makhachev's career, grainy shots, training in his small Dagestani gym, standing beside his mentor, surrounded by teammates. But each photo was marked with red ink, not across the faces, around his own, circling his younger self, almost like he was identifying him, not as who he was, but as someone who no longer existed. Below the photos lay stacks of personal correspondence. Many pages were torn. Some appeared burned along the edges. They weren't letters from fans or family. They were unsent messages written to himself. One read, "Hold on to the person before the cage." Another, "Strength without purpose becomes destruction." The final note found on top of the pile, dated 2 years ago. "I do not know if I train because I must be ready, or because I am becoming what I fear." Investigators discovered a small wooden box beneath a loose floorboard. Inside were 2 items wrapped in cloth: a childhood photo of him holding a puppy, and a broken prayer bead strand stained in dried sweat. Medical scanners later identified elevated cortisol residue, proof it had been held during extreme emotional stress. But the most chilling part? A handwritten sentence, etched into the rear wall, carved over and over using what experts believe was a broken fingernail. "At what point does the warrior stop returning from the fight?" This chamber wasn't built for conditioning. It was built for remembrance, an attempt to tether identity against the transformation occurring outside its walls. But just ahead, investigators would learn that the mansion wasn't only designed to push him past emotional limits. There was a final section, sealed, buried beneath foundation level, that revealed why someone would need that transformation and what he was preparing for. Beneath the mansion's reinforced foundation, investigators located a second hidden level, accessible only through a hatch concealed beneath a rug in Makhachev's private prayer area. Unlike the rest of the mansion, which utilized cutting-edge materials, this lower level was constructed using military-grade concrete and steel. There were no windows, no decorative elements, only a single dim emergency strip light running along the ceiling, illuminating a corridor that seemed more like a bunker than part of a home. When they entered, Instead, sensors began detecting trace amounts of human adrenaline lingering in the air, as if the space had been repeatedly used during heightened emotional states. The walls bore impact marks inconsistent with conventional training, hand-level dents, cracked padding, and areas where drywall had been replaced multiple times. Investigators initially believed it to be a rehearsal chamber, but then they found the files. Against the far wall, secured in a locked case, were black binders stamped with a symbol resembling an inverted crescent intersected by 3 horizontal lines, not associated with any athletic organization or known medical institute. Inside were written logs detailing simulations, not of fights, but of combat scenarios involving multiple aggressors, no weight limits, and no rule enforcement. Even more unsettling were dozens of printed still frames from infrared footage. Images of Makhachev alone, undergoing physical and psychological drills at 3 a.m., shadowboxing with no bags, no targets, just performing reaction sequences in utter silence. In many photos, his eyes appeared fixed on something not visible in the frame, as though bracing for a threat just out of sight. Investigators realized this wasn't to perfect competition techniques. It was to prepare for an event. But what kind? The final binder included an entry marked only with black marker across the front. During nightfall. No one knew what that meant yet, but the final section, the deepest part of the mansion, would answer that. And it wouldn't be something they could explain on paper. At the end of the subterranean corridor, past the reinforced walls and impact-scarred panels, investigators discovered a final sealed door unlike any other in the mansion. It wasn't locked by traditional means. There was no visible handle, just a pressure-sensitive biometric surface. Once overridden by the team's specialized equipment, the panel slid open with an unnaturally slow mechanical hum, almost as if the system had been designed to allow ample time for the person entering to change their mind. Behind it stood a circular room with no corners and no windows, built entirely of polished concrete. The lighting was unsettling. Small LEDs running from floor to ceiling, creating a constant strobing effect. At first glance, it looked like a high-tech sensory conditioning chamber, but then they noticed there were no acoustic dampeners, meaning every breath, every heartbeat amplified off the walls. In the center was a single leather chair, bolted into the concrete floor, facing a steel-framed observation mirror. The chair was fitted with posture restraints, not for attackers, but for someone expected to sit willingly and remain still under physical or psychological strain. Within arm's reach sat a small table holding only one item, a handheld digital recorder labeled in black marker, only after sundown. When investigators played its contents, there was no speech, just breathing, slow at first, then accelerating into sharp exhales. At the 11-minute mark, the breathing stopped entirely for 6 full minutes before a single sentence was whispered. Control your reaction. It learns. The final seconds of the recording captured something else, something faint, a dragging noise, followed by the microphone being abruptly shut off from the inside. No one could determine the purpose of the room. It held no signs of combat training or medical examination. It was built not for performance, but for observation under pressure. And according to the final timestamp, the recordings only ever took place between 2:14 and 2:27 a.m. Every night he was home. The team knew they had passed a line. What they found deeper inside left them unable to finish their report. Further inside the private sublevel was a final chamber that investigators informally named the gallery. It wasn't large, maybe 12 feet wide, but every inch of its curved walls was covered with photographs, pinned with precise spacing like part of an experiment. They were all taken from security footage, training sessions, or post-fight press events. But unlike normal media archives, Islam's face was scratched out in every single image. Not violently, methodically. Same pattern, same depth, same deliberate motion. It appeared he had done it himself. Some images were of opponents lying unconscious. Others were of his childhood home, his father, and early training days in Dagestan. The scratch marks deepened over time, evolving from faint etchings to full gouges. In the final images, dated just 2 months before investigators entered, the face wasn't removed at all. It was replaced. A larger shape was drawn over it, a faint outline of a figure towering behind him, its hand resting on his shoulder in every frame. Above the gallery wall, a short message was painted in Arabic and Russian. "If I forget who I am, do not help me remember." But that wasn't the most disturbing detail. Opposite the gallery stood a final door, heavily reinforced and labeled simply, "Live access. Do not trigger manually." Despite warnings, an investigator touched the panel. A quiet mechanical click followed, but the door remained shut. Instead, speakers embedded in the ceiling activated, and what they heard was not electronic recording. It was movement, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing on the other side of the door. One, then another, then a whisper. Not in any known language, but matched almost perfectly to the waveform taken from Islam's recorded breathing patterns. When investigators stepped back in fear, the footsteps stopped, and the final speaker output delivered one unnervingly calm sentence. "I'm not alone in here, neither are you." The team ordered the room sealed indefinitely, and no one has ever attempted to open that door again.